Hey guys, I'm Scott Michael of Titan Recording. Today I wanted to talk about some of the upgrades I've made to my studio, and I also wanted to talk about my feelings about plugins versus hardware effects. Now I know what you're thinking, all this rack gear here, he must prefer hardware to plugins, and not quite. When I started working in studios, it was all about hardware or outboard gear, and plugins were more of a side note. Especially native ones. Most studios were, and many still are, equipped with Pro Tools HD systems where all their plugins are handled by internal DSP cards instead of the computer's processor. But the majority of the compression, EQ, and other effects were handled by their console and outboard gear. It wasn't until I started my own studio that I pretty much left all that behind and started working entirely in the box, as they call it, or strictly with plugins. Now, plugins have come a long way. Most of them are really good these days. Some of the best are made by companies like Universal Audio, Waves Audio, and Slate Digital. Some run off the host processor, and some run off of the dedicated processors like UAD plugins. Most of these companies create emulations of classic hardware that have been used in studios for years. They even emulate an entire studio environment. You can record a track through a Slate virtual microphone system or something equivalent, choose the mic you want, the polar pattern, the preamp it's plugged into, the type of console it's being summed in, and then run it through your favorite vintage compression EQ, and then select the type of tape machine and even the tape itself that it's being tracked to. And I have to be honest, it's pretty fucking amazing, and in my opinion, it holds up pretty well to the real thing. It's a pretty great and exciting thing to be able to achieve that kind of quality at a fraction of the cost. On top of that, you can use as many instances of these plugins as you'd like, in mono or stereo, until your computer or your DSP can't handle it anymore. And therein lies part of the problem. Just as an example, take for instance Universal Audio's Apollo system. A lot of people rave about their plugins, but complain that their DSP chips can only handle a limited amount of instances of these plugins. It's pretty much why Universal Audio is giving away extra satellite DSP systems with their Apollo audio interfaces that they're selling right now. But even that isn't really enough. Imagine recording an entire band simultaneously, drums, bass, guitars, and vocals, and you want to run all of them through a bunch of instances of Neve 1073 emulations, not to mention compression and EQ. Now, it takes a ton of money tossed at Universal Audio DSP chips just to make that happen. Now, Universal Audio could obviously solve this by ditching the old DSPs and making more powerful ones. But then they might piss people off who bought into their older DSP systems. They could also just allow their plugins to be used natively if the DSP system is overloaded. But who knows what they'll do in the future. I'm hoping for the latter. Anyway, in steps Stephen Slate of Slate Digital, and he addresses this by saying that native processing can go so much further than a DSP-based system. And with Slate's catalog of plugins, he's mostly right. I can throw Slate's virtual mix console with mic modeling, preamp emulation, console emulation, and other effects on every track without putting too much of a dent in my processing. At 44.1K, that is. Now, you bump that up to 96K resolution and things start to get a bit heavier. Before I upgraded, I was really pushing the limits of my processor. And since I'm forced to use a Mac system, thanks to my Antelope 32 Plus, which I wouldn't trade for any other interface, upgrading isn't really a thing. By the way, Antelope, please make a Windows Thunderbolt driver so I can just switch to a Windows system. Please. Anyway, since the new Mac Pro won't be announced till 2018, and since you know it's going to be astronomically overpriced, Probably more so than just buying a bunch of outboard gear, I decided to do just that and lighten the load on my system. Now that's not the only reason. I know I could just render tracks with the plugins and then disable them. I'm keenly aware of that. There are just some things that I know I can commit to on the way in. Things that I pretty much always use and would actually prefer to have a hardware version of. Plus, it's an investment that's hard to argue with, and let's be honest, it's way more fun to use a bunch of great outboard gear than just settle for having to render all my plugin settings to their corresponding tracks. And I have missed working with real gear, real buttons and knobs. You feel more engaged in the art of making music. You can't really beat that. Now also, plugins get re-emulated by new companies or even the same company, and you end up having to buy that new upgraded and better version of that effect. Case in point, Universal Audio's standard versus their enhanced Fairchild emulations that you have to buy. Since I had an opportunity to make these additions, I just went for it. And an added bonus, they do sound better. Not a fuck ton better, but yeah, better. I'm not of the mind that hardware is so much better that plugins are basically crap in comparison. Some may be, but most aren't, especially not these days. There are a ton of comparison videos out there of all different types of emulations to their hardware counterparts. And some videos are much better than others. Some people don't compare them properly, or some are just biased. Also, some emulations are better than others. For instance, Slate and Universal Audio are two companies with really great emulations of an 1176 compressor, better than any other companies in my opinion, but even theirs start to kind of break up when pushed real hard, more than an outboard unit would. However, their recent releases of the Distressor emulation is nearly identical to a real Distressor. I honestly can't tell the difference. So it just goes to show that they are only getting better at this. And it's only a matter of time till they have it nailed for every piece of vintage gear you can imagine, and that's not a bad thing. So there is an argument for both sides. Plugins, though they still might not be quite as good as real hardware when it comes to sound, are close enough and damn near identical when used subtly. You can use a crap load of instances of them as well. With hardware, you're limited by how many units of that effect you actually own. I've been in studios where they have an entire rack just filled with 1176 compressors. And that's cool, I guess, but come on, shit is expensive. Thanks to companies like Warm Audio, Stam Audio, and many others, you can get clones of classic gear for a fraction of the cost. They sound great, and though some might argue they aren't as good as the real thing, there are many who disagree, and I'm one of them. If you think the difference between your song's sound quality balances on whether or not you have an authentic or a clone, the problem's you, not the gear. And another thing to keep in mind is that while the initial cost of software and plugins are much lower than hardware versions, they will become obsolete and will have to be replaced by updated versions or completely new iterations of those effects. And that probably won't be free. Hardware isn't going to be obsolete anytime soon. It may become more rare, but not obsolete. And if they do, that probably would be due to music becoming obsolete. But fingers crossed that doesn't happen if it hasn't already. Anyways, enough of that. Let me give you a rundown of what I got and what I use it for mainly. To start, I got a couple of DBX 160A compressors for kick and snare. Now, I don't always use these, but sometimes I have a drummer or a mix where I need a little bit of it. I probably would never use a lot. Next up, I got a couple of Warm Audio WA76 1176 style compressors for overheads. With these, I sometimes like to push them depending on the style of music, and I just prefer the hardware over the software, though I still use the software as well. Now I got a Midas lunchbox filled with 4 DBX 530 parametric EQs for kick, snare, and toms, because those are usually tracks that I like to shape a little more. And I usually use subtractive EQ techniques when doing that, so I don't really feel the need to buy anything more fancy to color the sound. They're good budget EQ in a 500 series form, that's all. I also threw in a couple of DBX 560 compressors for toms if I need them, which I usually don't, but they are useful for many applications as well. Okay, I got a Universal Audio LA610 for a number of applications, not to mention that it kicks ass, but the one major thing I use it for is bass guitar. The 610 preamp combined with the LA2A optical compressor is a killer combo for bass recording. This definitely upped the quality of my bass recordings a ton. I got an Empirical Labs distressor because it's amazing and works for pretty much anything. For example, I use the fat mic technique a lot on drums, and I love to throw this on it when I do that. The last pieces I'm going to talk about I didn't actually get for recording per se. I actually got them for my master bus when I'm mixing. Now, before I upgraded, I would always use a stereo Pultec EQ plugin and either a Fairchild or SSL bus compressor plugin on the master bus. So I got two Warm Audio EQP WA units for the stereo EQ that I use. And I had heard a lot of great things about this company, Stam Audio, and their SA4000 bus compressor, which is modeled after the SSL G series bus compressor. Stam really didn't disappoint because this thing sounds fantastic. I throw those on my master bus and it makes a huge difference in the final product. With the combination of hardware and plugins, I'm able to achieve the sound I want without overloading my processor. I've dropped my VST performance in Cubase by 40 to 50% just by doing this. And the great thing is I've set up my system so that I can use all these units as plugins within Cubase if I choose not to commit to them while tracking. So I can record with them, or I can mix with them, or both. Having that choice is pretty great. I guess you might call this a hybrid setup leaning towards the in-the-box setup. So though I may have gotten a lot of outboard effects, I still use my plugins plenty and can now use even more if I'd like. So anyways, that's all I got for now, guys. Thanks for watching. Hopefully I'll get to a tutorial or something sometime soon. We'll see. Anyways, please hit the subscribe button below and follow me on Twitter and Instagram and like me on Facebook. And if you want to have your tracks professionally mixed and or mastered by me, go ahead and check out the website below. Thanks, guys. See you later.